What is Happening at Work show. I'm welcomed here with my 3 co-hosts, and we're just here to talk tonight about what's happening in the world today, who we are, what we experienced, and where do we go from here. I am Alicia Mckoy, founder and CEO of Peak Mind, a mental well-being platform bringing wellness and stress relief to the workplace, because I know we all think we need it, and so I think you would too. I want to welcome in my co-host, Abby Tambasco, here to my left. She's short and spunky with a lot of great knowledge in the staffing and recruiting and placement world. Abby spends most of her day spending time with coding graduates into entry-level jobs and helping corporate partners understand how to work with this type of talent. Shaquan Eli, hella smart, tall, and fit, will kick your ass in martial arts. If you go against him, I wouldn't recommend it. He looks docile, but he's not. And then he'll explain the neurophysical implications of your aggression to you. So both mind and physical body. So he's a lot of smarts. And then we've got Ryan Spence, cute and hip. You know, he's got lots of tattoos. You can't see him right now, but he is. But he'll explain machine learning and artificial intelligence algorithms to you like no other person. And he also will talk to you about Robert Keegan's theory on human evolution and human change if you ask him about that. So thanks for joining us. We just want to talk about what's happening in the workplace today. What's happening to us, right? We're all humans. Are you human?
I sure hope so.
I think we all are, right? Yes. We're not replaced with robots yet. So we're not yet. It's coming, maybe.
It is, yeah.
So they say. But you know what? We want to kick off this panel by talking about, are we okay? As we further look at panels that talk about workplace stress, we want to talk about student stress. We want to talk about how the teachers are doing in the schools. We know that nurses are stressed, right? Life is happening, but what about the workers, the white collar workers? We're all dealing with different struggles. I open it up to my panelists and say, how is life happening to you these days? What are you seeing, right? What are your neighbors doing? I'm sure nobody on this panel has a crazy neighbor, a crazy client, a kid, or anything, right? What's happening in the world today? It's an uncomfortable topic to acknowledge that some of us are not okay, right? And I think the negative index, the Gallup polls state that over 40% of Americans are having a negative experience, which means you're stressed in a week. You're worried about if somebody's disrespecting you, how you're feeling, anxiety, right? It's all stuff that we're dealing with. But how are we seeing it show up in workplaces today? What are we seeing, people, friends? What are you having to coach friends on, Abby?
Yeah. Well, let's go back to neighbors, right?
Neighbors.
So like during COVID, right, like all of us moms got together. We're like, how are we gonna get through this? Like, this is stressful. We've got so much anxiety. We've all got kids. We're literally teaching our kids at home. We're working remote, right? And we're just like trying to survive. So I think it goes, you go to like the survivability mode. Like, how do I get through this? So like, am I going to exercise? Am I going to drink wine? Am I going to do it's like, how do I cope with what is happening? So, I mean, I would say most of my friends that are my neighbors or our coworkers went through that during the pandemic. So they were not well, and we adapted quickly and figured out, like, how do I get through this? And a lot of it was, we did journaling, we did group chats, text messaging, just like support each other. We did wine nights in, we exercised, so a lot of different things. But the world changed, right? And we had to adapt, and it was hard. And I think we're probably still not 100% there. There's still anxiety, there's still stress. I mean, we're still dealing, so.
You're right.
Yeah.
That everyone copes differently. You mentioned coping. Therapeutic techniques, coping skills. Most American adults didn't have these pre-pandemic, which is unfortunate, right? Mm-hmm. Because we got into a situation, a major life crisis, and we didn't have the tools that we needed to be able to survive this and to thrive through it, unfortunately. We're in it now. Right? What are we seeing? Shaquan, right? What does the brain tell us on how we can get through this type of stuff? Where we're at now? How can we move forward?
Well, not for nothing. We are dealing with something that we know the generation hasn't experienced since the early 1900s. So this is an extremely significant circumstance that we find ourselves in. Life is already difficult. And then when you add a pandemic into that, exacerbates everything, and it does complicate matters from a neuroscientific perspective. And so from my point of view, dealing with education and other people's children and adults who are dealing with other people's children, it is a very complicated matter. And when you're adding complex stressors to an already complicated life, it just makes it really difficult to deal, and that impacts our engagements with one another, our abilities to be cognitive and to think with the higher faculties of the mind, because when we're in stressed situations, when we are in chronic stress environments, then it really does impact our ability to think, to be conscious, if you will. And so from what I'm seeing from my point of view as an educational leader, trying to get kids to evolve, right, to reach their highest potential, it starts with the adults.
It does.
And so everybody is bringing something to the table, from what they are experiencing from home, the fears from the pandemic and from mental health, and then the pressures of still having to move the needle. And so
I felt all this. You're talking my language right now. Yeah.
And so compounding that makes it very difficult to just be a human being, right? When we are trying to help other people with their issues, but then we also have issues to deal with too. So
you're right.
From a neuroscientific perspective, those stressors make it difficult to access the higher faculties of the brain. And that's where we want to be, especially as educators, dealing with other people's children.
Yeah. So there's not technology yet that we can insert to the brain to turn the amygdala, the hippocampus, hypothalamus, and the hippocampus. You're the tech guy,
Right.
There's not brain inserts yet?
Not yet.
Not yet?
Elon's working on it.
Okay. Right, they say the COVID shot gave us the brain implants, but I don't think it worked in that, part of the ventricle of our brain that secretes cortisol and serotonin and those type of things that make our emotions. And so that's the brain functionality that Shaikhan was talking about. And, where is, we all have kids, right? All of the panelists have kids, so we're all working parents, and we know that the stressors of the daily lives of being a parent is stressful, but what are our kids going through? Is anybody seeing issues with their kids, their friends? How are things evolving with how we're showing up to our kids? What are we seeing? Have you seen anything?
For sure, yeah. My kids struggle with disruption. I think that's what we're all saying, right? Like a child thrives in stability, in knowing what tomorrow is going to bring, and being able to just not worry. And so I have two boys, and them not knowing what tomorrow is going to be like brings them a lot of stress, right?
And their parents don't know.
We
Yeah.
don't.
So how about that?
And they're just discovering that, right?
We're comforting them.
They're
We're
just-
trying to, yeah.
Right. Well, and they're just finding out that mom and dad don't know everything.
Yep.
Everything, right? It's an assumption. They're God and Goddess, right?
Yep.
Mom and dad.
Yep.
And it's not the case. And this, for the first time in their life, they're recognizing that stuff is probably shockingly unstable, and
Yep.
this has really brought that forward. So they're stressed. Yeah.
They are. We're seeing that 17 to 24 is the most stressed demographic right now. They're the most suicidal ideation, the most suicide prone, right? Their prefrontal cortex is not fully developed, right? So they think within an instant that life hits them and trauma is in front of them and they have to react. They don't understand that, as we do as adults, that maybe a bottle of wine, maybe a drink.
They're not even 21 yet, so they shouldn't be doing that.
Right, maybe that'll help us cope, whatever your coping mechanism is, right? They don't have those tools, and I'm sure you see that in the school districts, right? I think you would also say that some of the parents don't even have their prefrontal cortex fully formed. That's a different conversation for an adult, but we know that PTSD, traumas, right? There's a lot of just developmental challenges that also prevent adults from having coping mechanisms and techniques, but children are prone to that, and they are struggling with that. What are you seeing in the schools these days, or having to try and combat?
It's the same thing. When we're talking about post-traumatic stress disorder, typically that's an event, but we're dealing with something that is complex because it lasts. So a lot of the children that I work with can't remove themselves from the environment. So there was a stat from, I think, the Pentagon that said that students in the area code that I work in, or that have really depressed communities, are 2 times as likely to experience post-traumatic stress disorder than soldiers returning from live combat.
Oh, wow.
2 times more likely. And the thing is that those soldiers, they can remove themselves from the battlefield, but the children can't do it. But the thing about where we are now with this pandemic is that none of us can remove ourselves from the pandemic. So there's a lot of fear that's associated that is causing the complex stress that is disrupting our bodily functions, our bodily systems, and causing a lot of the illness that we have to combat. So that absolutely shows up in the families, right? So you have the family system, family systems theory, you have the family system that is disrupted. And then when the children are coming into the schools, they're bringing in some of the trauma that they're receiving from, their families. And a lot of the energy that we get is not the energy directed towards the school, but we're receiving it because that's where the children are and they're looking for a safe environment. So it's important that we are able to provide some social emotional processes and techniques and strategies for children to combat the stresses that we know that they're receiving. Same thing for the adults, because again, this is nothing that can be separated. We're all dealing with it in different ways. And so without question, it is within the schools and making it difficult to get to academics, because you can't get to academics until you've addressed, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, food, water, shelter, safety. And right now, a lot of people don't have food. They're food insecure. Their shelter is insecure. Their safety is compromised due to the pandemic. And so, the mental health is impacted.
You're so right. The negative life index has never been higher for working mothers. Working fathers always had it hard. Gallup polls international track, in the last 7 days, have you had a stressful event, an event that has made you fearful, insecure, stressed, anxious, all of those things. And they test this across 150 countries. So they're always polling what's happening. And over the last 18 months, the negative life index has increased. And so, but the positive life index, the opposite side of it, have you been rewarded and comforted? And do you see yourself in a positive life situation in 5 years? That stayed stable. So we look at the stability of the next 5 years that working mothers, we know that 20% have left jobs. We don't know if they're coming back due to the Great Resignation. They may or may not, depending on how the companies pivot their cultures. But we know that the negative life index, I don't know if you guys would be surprised to hear that we just in May of 2021 entered the mental health pandemic. And so following any pandemic, major tragedy, there's always a mental health pandemic. And so they're predicting this one to be 3.5 years. So
I can't handle that. I don't know if I can do it.
Exactly. This is the sentiment.
Yikes.
Do we think that our neighbors, our friends, our coworkers, our peers are ready to handle life for the next 3.5 years? If the negative life index is already the highest it's ever been in the last 15 years, are they ready to handle what the next 3.5 years is going to bring them? What do you think from corporate America? You work in big America.
Yeah. No, everybody's trying to figure this out. This is so new. Like the playing board has been messed up, and everybody's trying to figure out exactly how to address it. So employers to employees. We're talking about children, internal family structure. There isn't a structure that hasn't been questioned by the pandemic, and the intensity of disruption is like just below the surface. So it's not really transparent, and it's amazing to see both across a global organization like my own, but also inside of my neighborhood, like the kind of just under the surface, it's just boiling. And so I'm not surprised to hear that they're considering the next 3 years something that's like the mental pandemic, because I think we all see it. I dare you to ask anybody on the street what is just below their surface, right? Because it's live.
Yeah.
And it's a question, and it's unstable, just like my kids would.
We all just pivoted and went virtual, right? It's
Yeah.
We ran, right? Let's get virtual. Let's go hide from this. But then how do we support ourselves post going virtual? Or you're siloed, right? So there needs to be a platform. There needs to be something that will support people, right? I don't think anyone's done that yet, right? We're still remote. We're still kind of. It's right.
We don't know where to go yet.
That's where that change has to happen.
And not for nothing, there's an impact of going virtual, right? Because we're
oh
social
my gosh.
creatures.
Yep.
So we're missing something that is inherent in the human experience.
Yep.
across a screen, the Zoomiverse, or what have you,
Yes.
and we're seeing that in the schools. Like there's just
In the
this
workplaces
quality,
too. People are
workplace,
like
there's a quality that's
dying to
missing.
be around people.
Yeah.
Yeah. That human connection.
It's so important, and that's the mission of Peak Mind. We're trying to meet people where they are in the workplace, at home, right? Bring together cultures that have been disconnected due to this major life event. We're trying to pull people and say, how are you feeling today? That's a question that a lot of adults are hard to ask, right? Without trying to hear the normal,
Well,
I'm
not
okay.
You're not together in the workplace anymore.
Right.
You're in your own office or wherever you're working from, so you're siloed.
Yeah.
So how do I check in with my team? How do I find out, how are you doing? How do I support you? And that's exactly what Peak's doing, right?
It is.
Yeah.
And it's trying to dig further into how are you really feeling? Because we're so normalized to say, I'm okay. I'm well.
Yeah, I'm guilty of it.
All good, right? To have the normal conversation to say, how are you really doing?
Yeah.
What's really happening? That conversation is something that we as adults haven't normalized. And so that's what we're really here to educate and make people aware of. We need to have those curious conversations and be okay that maybe the conversation isn't what the response isn't going to be what you want to hear. It's that I'm not okay. But that's what talking about, that 40% of Americans have dealt with a stressful or anxious situation in the last 7 days. We need to normalize these behaviors because it's happening across the globe. We're not going to change it anytime soon, and so it's up to us as adults to say, how do we have a better conversation with our peers and our friends and our allies, and ask the tough questions to have the tough conversations and move this forward. What do we think that the future is going to hold for the workplace as we go into the next episode when we're going to talk about stress in the workplace? What could you leave as your last tidbit as what do you think the next several months is going to hold for your workplace or what you've seen?
Yeah, I know that for me personally, you're so accessible, right? Via Zoom or any of these platforms that you're using. So I feel like my time have almost gotten busier, less time to maybe work-life balance has changed for me. Because it's easy just to throw a meeting on, right? So I would love to see some work-life balance, I guess virtually now, if you will, because it was easier to attack when you had your whole team in front of you, working, and so you don't know how people are feeling. You don't know how they're doing. They've got kids at home, and it's just different now. So it's like, how do we support? These people are your biggest producers at your company, right? So how do I support them? How do I make sure that they're still productive, they're still energetic? The culture has shifted, right? So how do we support them, and how do we make sure that they're doing okay, and make sure that wherever all the companies are still productive, right? That's the biggest piece. So,
right. What do you see, Shekwan?
I think that we're going to see a shift in prioritization of social, emotional well-being for the adults in these companies, particularly in education. And I think there's going to be a shift in just how our schedules are in general. We're seeing a drying of the employment pool across disciplines, right? From education, every industry has a need for people to work, right? The workforce is dry. I don't know where they are.
Great resignation.
Right.
We're going to talk about that in episode 3. They're on their sofa at home in their pajamas and don't want to come back to work because that was kind of comfortable being in your fuzzy slippers. So we'll talk about that.
Who wants to work 60 hours a week?
Yeah.
For a pittance, right? So I think there's going to be a reimagining of workforce labor and a commitment to social emotional health.
That's good.
Yeah. So I think that from my perspective, there are really good people working on this problem itself. Getting the opportunity to watch organizations across the planet I think they're all kind of aware of this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And even extending their awareness forward to their employees. So I think that corporate America, at least that I know of, will rise to meet the need. And I think that that's what they've always been doing, and they just are reorienting that lens, right? So they're starting to understand that not only do their stakeholders matter, but the most forgotten part of that stakeholder equation, the employees themselves, are now part of the equation. And so here we go. And I can't imagine we're going to get to the end of those 3 years and we're not going to have some amazing stuff.
Oh, we're going to. We're seeing it here at Peak Mind. You know, thanks to Ryan as our CTO, Chief Technology Officer, and myself, and Shaquan, our Chief Science Officer. We're bringing together amazing technologies, leveraging the technologies that have already been out there in the marketplace, leveraging the science of how the brain operates, leveraging just what we know as humans, right, as our peers or our friends or neighbors, to see what they're going through. We're bringing it all together into Peak Mind, the platform, and we can't talk about some of the amazing clients that we have coming up, but we've got some amazing clients that are doing great things, that are bringing our platform onto their platform, so that we can hopefully bring it to millions of Americans in the workplace here soon. We thank you for joining us today, and we've got, you know, Shaquan Eli, Avi Tambasco, myself, Alicia Mckoy, and Ryan Spence. We're all just here to talk about what's happening in the workplace, and we hope you'll join in next time. So thanks for joining us.